You're listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast. All right, well, welcome back to another edition of the CD Baby DIY Musicians Podcast. My name is Kevin, and with me are Robert and Chris.
Hey, howdy.
So how's everyone doing?
Very well.
Tired.
Chris just got back from yet another tour. How did it go for you, Chris?
It was great. It was a little different from the usual tours that I've been on, which have been for primarily my band or my music. This one, I was kind of a hired gun with a band of... Portland band of some of my friends called Norfolk and Western, and I was also at the same time trying to do 40 hours of work per week
on the road,
which is ridiculous. Right.
That really cuts into your Nintendo time.
Cuts into party time, and it was tough. You know, it'd be a few hours in the morning, a few hours in the afternoon.
You're just doing it on your laptop.
A few hours at night, a few hours.
But how are you doing it? Because it's kind of an interesting idea for someone who maybe even owns their own business or can telecommute, who is thinking about, well, maybe I can do this from the road and do a little touring and still get paid for my job back home. How are you doing it?
You mean just sort of
technically? Yeah.
I got a Verizon Air Card.
Mm-hmm.
I know AT&T has a similar product, but basically it's just a little device you plug into the side of your laptop, click a few buttons, and you've got wireless internet wherever you go. Which is all well and good, except that if you have to do driving or you're responsible for lugging gear, there's lots of interruptions on tour, is basically what I'm saying. And
how was the reception as far as like being in the middle of nowhere and getting reception?
It was surprisingly good. I think there was maybe like two places where it didn't get it, one in the middle of Utah and one in Southern Oregon.
Is that something you pay for, kind of like a cell phone or something?
Yeah. Modem is like $20 or $30, and then the service I think is like $50 or $60 a month. So it's comparable to other internet stuff that you would get.
Are you going to try and attempt to do that again?
I think if I were to do it again, it would help. First of all, if it were my own tour that I booked and was responsible for the routing and scheduling, because I could say, okay, you know, we'll play in LA Monday night, and then make sure that the tour scheduling allows me to have 8 hours where I can just sit and work and then drive to San Diego that night and play or something, you know, where it's not super stressful getting from point A to point B and trying to do work.
Yeah.
So
it's a cool idea for, you know, someone who's got a job that's got that flexibility.
On the flip side of that is that if it were my band, then I could route it properly to get 40 hours of work in, but then I'd also be the one worrying about all the other details. Whereas in this setup, it was more like I was just sort of the guy along for the ride to play some guitar.
Got up and played, yeah.
So yeah, mixed bag.
Well, that's a cool idea. We'll have to see if anyone else has attempted to do that and how it went for them. Well, we're going to jump into some news items, and then after that, for the first time ever, we have a listener feedback line, and we put out the call for people to send us their mistake stories. If you remember back to episode 1, we started off with mistakes we've made. So we asked people to share, and people have been sharing, and we'll have some of that for you later on in the show. But now let's talk about a few news items that have been happening lately. First off, Soundscan, the company that tracks sales in stores, they have released a report, kind of a state of the industry report. And it's pretty interesting if you can get your hands on it. I don't know if we can post it on the website. I don't know where we got it from and if it's something that we can post. But it's just one of those things that came through email. Hey, look at this. But it's pretty interesting. It's really in-depth. They break down all sorts of numbers, and it's the kind of information you're not getting from the news when they like to do the
scaremongering.
The once a week, the music industry is dead story. So, but the most interesting thing in there that I found was the dramatic rise in sales of music in non-traditional music stores. I guess you'd classify that as places like grocery stores, like Whole Foods, I know sells music now, and Starbucks and things like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I just thought it was kind of an interesting thing that if you're trying to figure out where to put your get your albums for sale, definitely you got to think outside the box.
Well, what better way to make it stand out than to be the only CD in the whole store?
Yeah.
You had recently met was it Putumayo? Is that how you pronounce it?
Putumayo Records.
And they had never sold in music stores, right? Don't they just go to gift shops and more touristy?
He was, when I met him, we talked briefly about that, and hopefully I'll have him on the podcast because I thought it was interesting to hear how his label, which is mainly a jazz and world music label, how, you're not finding a lot of jazz and world music at Best Buy, which is one of the main places people buy music, or Walmart. Those places only stock, 1,000 titles. So labels like that are really, finding new avenues to get the music out there, which those avenues are available to indie artists as well most of the time. And kind of reminded me also of the episode we had when Dan Zanes was on talking about how he just went to kids stores, that were selling kids clothing, kids items and things like that. And that's where he was getting his music and selling a lot of albums that way. So that I just found that number interesting. There's a whole lot of other interesting numbers in that report that pertain to how things are going. And I don't think it's as bad as the media likes to make it out to be. Things are definitely shifting around, but according to them, like CD sales, it was still somewhere up near 80%.
The thing that, the most fascinating number that stuck out about that whole report to me was the fact that there's something like 400,000 CDs or different titles manufactured last year. Is that?
Yeah, it was something like that.
And of that, 80% of those sold 100 copies or less. So, I mean, if there needs to be any more numbers to prove the whole long tail theory,
that was definitely interesting to see. And they were saying that the overall music sales were down some, but it was still CD sales were the majority of it. And a lot of it is this report actually, and that figure you mentioned probably is one of the more accurate that actually includes indie music.
Right.
And so many of the reports you hear that just doesn't include indie music. So, Mariah Carey or somebody sold a lot less albums, but in place of that, 10,000 indie artists got a sale,
Yeah.
And I think that's something worth noting, but it doesn't make dramatic headlines and scream. And
our indie ranks are slowly moving forward.
That's right.
One sale.
Our slice of the pie is slightly widening.
That's right. Another thing I saw just recently is that Metallica has launched a new thing called Mission Metallica. And this is a podcast about indie music, so you may, after listening to the last couple episodes, be wondering why we're talking about artists like Metallica or Radiohead, but it's just interesting to see how these mainstream label artists are doing things that typically they wouldn't have to in order to maintain fans. It's kind of the things that indie artists would do. So it's just kind of interesting to see what they're doing and learn from some of these ideas. And this particular one is a whole website dedicated to the making of their new album. When you, I guess, just enter in your email address. I went to the page, but I don't want to get spam, so I'm not a Metallica fan. So
they need to have a psychiatrist cam.
Well, there probably is.
Fresh on the heels of that movie.
It seemed like an interesting idea where you could go and hear tracks that are in process, and it sounded like you could even hear, tracks that weren't finished and photos and things like that. So it's just kind of an interesting idea of something that's engaging the artist more than just, here's the latest, greatest album by Metallica. And I'd be interested to see how it goes for them. I don't know if something like that would work for an indie artist that's...
Moving Rushmore, they were an unknown band, and they basically did the same thing. They documented the process of making albums and the experience of becoming a band. Because we have all these resources, like to allow fans to dig deeper if they want to is definitely important.
Yeah, and I think the main difference between what Metallica does or what Radiohead does and what an indie artist might do is that, they have a famous brand or famous name and, they're famous themselves. And so people will watch that stuff just because of that. It may be the most boring thing ever, but people will still go to it. But an indie artist, that's where you got to get creative. If you want, people will really latch onto it, I think, more if you're an indie artist, but it has to be good and creative. And there's a lot of good ideas out there. And especially with video, if you have somebody who does video in the band or has a friend, it'd be better if it wasn't someone in the band, ideally. But if you've got a friend who's trying to go to college for film or something, be friends with those people, and you'll probably have more video than you can shake a stick at.
Indeed.
And you won't have to edit it.
Yeah. Your comment about the brand made me think of I watched a Radiohead video where it's Tom York and Johnny Greenwood outside running up a hill with a camera following them, and there's all this wind and horrible, mic noise, and they get to the top of the hill, and they play this acoustic song. It sounds terrible. I love it because it's Radiohead. But my thought watching it was, wow, this would suck. I would hate this band if I didn't know it was Radiohead.
You wouldn't even get to the top of the hill.
I would have turned it off.
Right. So yeah, I think when you're seeing bands like Radiohead do something like that, you really have to think, okay, they can get away with this because it's Radiohead. It's Radiohead doing something that if another band was doing it, everyone would hate. But because it's Radiohead and people like them, it's interesting, So if you keep that in mind, some of these ideas might actually work to get you some fans. Well, moving on, Grand Theft Auto 4. Those of you that aren't gamers, that was released a couple weeks ago. In the first week, it sold $500 million. It was all over the news because that's more than the biggest blockbuster ever, they were saying, as far as 1 week's total sales.
It's probably got more sex and violence than any mainstream movie, too.
Yeah, let's just say my child will never be playing Grand Theft Auto 4. Nor do I condone playing it. But, I think it's just interesting. We had Peter Davenport on a couple episodes ago from Microsoft Game Studios. And the main game they do there is Project Gotham Racing. I think part of the shift in numbers, that you're seeing in like that Soundscan report is that a lot of people are spending their time and money on video games as opposed to music. And I've got a list of some of the artists here that appeared in Grand Theft Auto 4. They had over 200 songs. And it's all big mainstream artists like Smashing Pumpkins, Thin Lizzy, Bob Marley, The Who, Queen, Black Sabbath, R. Kelly, John Coltrane. It's quite a mixed bag here. Yeah. Elton John, ZZ Top, REM. And it's like, for $50, you're playing a video game that has all this music in it. And it's, I don't know, it just seems like there's not as much of a need to buy it.
Yeah.
And people are just choosing to spend their money on different entertainment options.
Well, I think in Grand Theft Audio 2, or audio.
Grand Theft
in Grand Theft Auto, you can change the radio station while you're driving. So you might go from REM to Thin Lizzy or whatever.
Really? And games like, Project Gotham Racing are using a lot of rock music and things like that. But it seems like with this, it's even getting beyond just, the traditional driving game with just cranking music,
Yeah.
And it's got all across the board, jazz, rock, pop. So it's kind of interesting to see how much money there could be in video games and how much money potentially for the music. I'm sure these tracks weren't cheap. I know that a lot of video games, they really don't pay a lot. When they're using heavy indie artists, they usually can't afford that much for music, and you're kind of going on, the promotional aspect of it, but
they made $500 million. They can afford to get.
Yeah, $500 million in the first week. That's. I'm sure this is the kind of game where I'm sure there's lots of product placements in there as well that probably help pay for the production. So it'll be kind of interesting to keep tabs on the video game industry, and I'm sure it's going to be a big outlet for indie music and just music in general as things kind of shift and change and meld into new business models. But that also brings me to something else. I was working on helping track down some music for a video game. I noticed how many artists on CD Baby and MySpace and places like that, they don't list who they sound like realistically. And even if you're like a niche artist, you don't sound like U2. You don't sound like the Beatles. But you search U2 and the Beatles and everybody comes up. And it's like, at this point where there's so much music out there, I would just tell artists, I know it's cool to say you're a 100-year-old person on your MySpace page and that your music sounds like all these crazy bands that you really aren't. But, for people out there that are actually using these websites to search for music, it really benefits you to be as accurate as possible. Not everyone's looking for U2. And when they are, if you don't sound like U2, they're not going to, check out your music anyway. But people like video game makers, TV shows, and all these people that in the past weren't looking for music online or indie music are now looking for it. And I was doing that process the last couple of days, and it's pretty maddening to be like, oh, here's a band that sounds like what I'm looking for, and then I play it. I'm like, I don't think they've even ever heard U2 before because they certainly don't sound like them.
They're just putting the names in there so they come up in searches.
Yeah, and I think that was the trick. A few years back, people would put in famous artists just because people would be searching for that.
Yeah.
And I think people have gotten beyond that where, now there's enough music out there. They know there's indie music that'll fit what they're looking for, but they don't want to waste their time thinking around on people's pages that say they sound like, I don't know, the Beatles. And
the worst offender is Radiohead. Like, I switched into this position now where I'm listening to most of the stuff that comes in to CD Baby, and everyone says they sound like Radiohead, and no one does. Like Beatles, sometimes I'm like, oh, that's kind of Beatle-esque, but never, ever have I found someone who said they sounded like Radiohead who actually did.
And I think a lot of times people are putting the names of bands that they like, but don't necessarily sound like,
right.
Which is a big difference. So that's one thing. If you're serious about people stumbling across your music on the internet for whatever reason, make those things as accurate as possible.
It could be kind of a reality check too, though. Sometimes I remember in college I played in a band, and we hated Bare Naked Ladies. Like, didn't like them. No one liked them. We wanted to be like Radiohead and the Beatles and all these, big bands.
Of course.
Yeah.
And we had this friend be like, you guys sound like the Bare Naked Ladies. I was so offended. And I was like, no, we don't. And then, like, a few years later, I listened to a recording once that band had broken. I was like, oh, we kind of did.
Oh, my gosh.
And so, maybe listen to your friends even when they're offending you.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's hard when you're the creator of the music sometimes. I mean, and we get calls, too, from artists who say, I can't classify my music. It's like no other music out there in the world. And whether you really believe that or not, everything's derivative. And you need to hunker down and listen to your music or have someone listen to your music and come up with some descriptive words and some bands that it sounds like, because that's the best way to really market yourself.
And if you want to get those kind of placements, you got to be as specific with your music as possible. That may mean that it eliminates some opportunities, but that's the whole point. People aren't going to take you seriously for those kind of opportunities if, you're a death metal band and you say you sound like the Beatles and U2. I mean, those may be the most popular searches, but that doesn't help them out. And so they don't want to waste their time. So for this next segment, we're going to try something new. Hopefully it doesn't crash and burn. We got ourselves a little phone number that people can call in and leave feedback. We posted something on cdbaby.org and send something out to our email list for the podcast, looking for your mistake stories. And let me give out that phone number real quick, 206-426-5683. 206-426-5683. So it's not a toll-free number. Maybe we'll get there someday.
When we have a budget.
Yeah, when we have a budget. But basically, you can call that number and leave us any sort of feedback, and we can play it on the show. And for this specific episode, and we still have more coming in, so we'll probably play some in the next episode or so. But we asked for your mistakes, since we started out podcast episode 1 talking about mistakes we had made. And so we have some interesting mistakes that people have made that they wanted to share with us. We're going to play some of those now, and we'll comment on them.
The number you have dialed has been changed.
Hi, my name is Aaron, also known as Mr. Vocious. A couple of years ago when I was in a band called Elias Crone, I organized a whole group of bands to do a benefit for breast cancer. It was a little complicated of a situation. Essentially, we were going to do a concert, record the concert, and sell the recordings and give the proceeds to this organization for breast cancer. The organization that we were creating the benefit for misunderstood, and the women involved in the organization accosted me at the show and told me I was a liar and a thief and a creator of fraud and all these kind of things. And basically, I handed the woman about $1,700 and left nothing for the recording to be created, and I ruined a lot of things for everybody. And I guess what I learned from it is when you have an idea, you have to stand up for it. Hey, thanks, CD Baby. Bye.
So that was Aaron, a.k.a. Mr. Vocious.
I didn't. What exactly did the women think he was doing that was fraudulent?
They were recording the show. They were going to take the money from the door to put out the CD and then sell that CD to make profits for the...
So when he's putting the money in his pocket, they thought he was running away with the cash. So yeah, that I think for that one, it's probably best to put all that stuff in writing, hand it to them, sign off on it.
Yeah, definitely.
Poor guy.
Poor guy. No, you don't want to mess around with angry women with a breast cancer fundraiser.
I think the real lesson here is don't ever help people.
Don't ever help people.
Don't help
it just
people.
causes problems.
Hey there, this is Scott Andrew, singer-songwriter from Seattle, calling in with my story for the CD Baby podcast. Here's my story. Let it be a lesson to everybody listening that one of the things you don't want to do in rock and roll is mess with your audience too much. Case in point, a couple years ago when my band was playing at this roadhouse down in Ohio, we weren't really hitting it off with the crowd. They were sort of more of a rock crowd, and we were playing a lot more alternative stuff. Made the mistake of riffing on some rock songs, some AC/DC, some Metallica, maybe even a little bit of Pantera. Keep this in mind. If you do this, be prepared to play the entire song, even if you just kind of suck at it and you kind of goof your way through it. Because all we did was end up feeding the audience's fury with us. And at some point in the night, I think I'd never been happier to see police lights outside the window. And that's my story.
Funny thing is I can totally picture where he's playing in Ohio.
It's like the Blues Brothers place where they're throwing glass.
When I was touring, we would often find these towns in Ohio where, this was, the mid to late 90s, and people would come to a show driving their Trans Am in their Def Leppard tour shirt that looked like it was brand new, and we're like, what decade are we in?
We might be alienating our audience right now.
I don't know. But that's funny. I could totally picture that. Yeah, you don't want to go to a place and
give them a taste of what they want.
What they really want, which isn't you.
Turns out that you're just making fun of what they like.
Oh,
I
don't
actually know Scott.
antagonize.
Yeah, so that was Scott from Seattle. So Scott, that's good advice. I'm glad you made it out of there alive. And yeah, don't do that.
That just reminds me of one thing about cover songs. Granted, they were just doing jokey things, but it's always a risk with cover songs that you have to accept the fact that someone might come up after and be like, that was my favorite song of your guys.
Yeah.
Yep, had that happen before.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we used to have a couple cover songs in the set, stuff that fit our vibe, not like, a cover band would do, but someone would always come and go, man, what was that fifth song you guys played? Oh, that was the best song ever. Is that on your record? Or they'd buy the album,
It's
asking which track
a
that
record.
was, and be like, yeah, here you go, kid. It's track 5. By the time they get home, they won't remember.
Hi, this is Jack Becker, one of your grateful followers at CD Baby, and a story that I'd like to tell is the time I had to become a singer. We were playing a gig the night before New Year's Eve here in Seattle, and the singer didn't have a car, so I usually picked him up at 7 o'clock at night. So I got a call in the morning, 7 a.m., to come pick the singer up, and I had to explain to him that it was 7 a.m., not 7 p.m., and lo and behold, when it was time to actually get ready for the gig that night, he was a no-show. So 5 minutes before we had to go on stage, I had to learn all the songs, sing them, and basically pull it off. So I became a singer that night. So I have to thank that singer for not showing up, that front man. But that's the story of that.
Wow.
Trial by fire.
Yeah.
That was the night he became a
I
singer.
would have just gone home.
Well,
like
yeah, I wonder if
impossible if it was originals.
he knew the lyrics, or if he had just had some sheets in front of him and winged it.
But, I've not had a situation where somebody didn't show up, but had many times where there was miscommunication about what time the bus was leaving, and or what time we needed to be at the airport, and someone comes strolling out. We all pull up to their house to pick them up, and we're getting them out of bed, and that's not fun, especially when you're trying to catch a plane.
I have a friend that plays occasionally in a band of some stature, and it's a big band. It's 12 to 16 people, I think, and they've got a few buses, and there's just a strict time. If you don't make this bus by 2 p.m., you're responsible for getting to the next gig, and it could be, hundreds of miles away.
Wow.
See,
Buy
people
your
always say
ticket.
that, but I want to know one band that's actually done that.
She says they do it.
We stopped one time at to get gas at the truck stop. Truck stops become your friend. Someone was in the bathroom, and everyone assumed he was in his bunk asleep, and it was like 10 minutes down the road. Hey, has anyone seen that guy? He's sleeping, and then someone goes and looks. And
that was before the age of cell phones.
Yeah,
right?
this is before everyone had a cell phone. So we pull back. He's just sitting there on the curb because it was in the middle of nowhere. It's like,
man.
what are you gonna do? I mean, payphone's not gonna help you out. And so
I need to call my bus.
yeah. So now with cell phones, it'd be a little easier. But,
Yes, hi, how's it going? This is JG Bocella calling from Pittsburgh, PA. But I had a funny little story I wanted to share. I was in a couple different bands years ago, and we had this one gig, kind of a last-minute gig, and they didn't really tell me all the details about the gig, so we just kind of showed up, and it was a couple people there, one of those gigs, not a lot of people. It looked like kind of a rec room type of thing in the city somewhere. There was another band there, too, and then I think one other act. Anyway, I was in a period where I was just listening to all this old Ray Charles stuff, that Atlantic Years record. And there's that one song called Let's Go Get Stoned, and it's like, let's go get stoned, this is a great tune. But anyway, so I'm singing this tune, that was part of the set. So we played the gig, and then we tear it down. We're about to leave, and the guy from the other band says to me, that I was cracking up when you sang Let's Go Get Stoned. I said, why? That's a great song. What? He said, man, do you know where we're playing? This is an NA meeting house. This is where they have Narcotics Anonymous meetings. This is what the whole place is. So I felt so bad. I'm sitting there singing Let's Go Get Stoned at the Narcotics Anonymous. Anyway, that's my story. One of those things. So, have a good one. See ya. Bye-bye.
That reminds me of a gig I just played. I played at this university in Spokane, and like a couple of my songs have tons of profanity and, adult content. So I play the show, and there's like a few kids in the audience, and, I was thinking of sort of tempering it and editing, and then we decided, these kids are cool, whatever.
Yeah.
they play Grand Theft Auto 4.
Yeah, exactly. So we're getting paid, and I look at the check, and it's like a fundamentalist Christian school, and they probably weren't so cool with all those F-bombs I just threw out.
Probably not going to get invited back either.
Probably not. But they were lovely people.
Reasons for having a clean version as well as a dirty version.
Should have played the radio edit.
That's funny. Yeah, you might want to check out what venue you're playing at and who's putting the show on before you sing songs about getting stoned at the Narcotics Anonymous. Wonder how many people fell off the wagon that night.
Man, that sounds like a good idea.
That sounds... Man, I've been jonesing. Keep those stories coming in, and we'll keep sharing them, but also we're going to open it up to other ideas and just general comments. If you want to leave feedback by leaving us an audio message instead of emailing us, you're more than welcome to. Feel free to call us no matter what style or what you're doing. We want to hear from you, and if it's entertaining enough, we'll play it on the show. You've been listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast, broadcasting from Portland, Oregon, USA.
anything to make you